The Dialed In Angling Podcast, presented by OnX Fish, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Strike Master, and 13 Fishing. Well, this week we are doing the podcast from Webster, South Dakota. We are in the greater Bay area, an area that I love fishing. I know if you listen to this podcast, we've done the podcast from this location, primarily while ice fishing and fishing with our good buddy Marcus Quam. This week, I am joined by my good friend, Mitch Hackenmueller, and my other good buddy, Chris Britton from Rapala. This whole fishing trip came together last minute because Chris was like, we got to go fishing somewhere. He had planned on coming out to Webster, South Dakota, fishing with Marcus Quam. And he's like, dude, I got a couple people back out on me. You got to come. And, you know, if you listen to the podcast last week, I was sick. I just got back from vacation. I had to do my taxes. We still have snow and ice up north. My brain just wasn't quite there yet. And, you know, the more and more I thought about it, I literally slept on it. And I was like, yeah, we got to go to South Dakota. You know, been watching a lot of YouTube videos. I know Mitch was talking to me about going possibly down to the river in Red Wing or Pool 2 or wherever. That's what I love about springtime. You know, if you tuned into this podcast last week, I was talking about possibly going up to the Rainy River. You have all of these springtime locations and all of these great springtime fishing locations that you want to get to. It's just a matter of cramming it all in. And then, of course, just pulling the trigger and doing it. So many people talk about it, but they just never do it. I know for me, I love going to Green Bay. I also love going up to the Rainy River. I like going down to Red Wing. I like going out to Chamberlain. I like going to Mobridge. And that's why I think this location where we're at right now is obviously overlooked. We fished yesterday, guys. We had a lot of fun fishing out here, and it really kind of revitalized sort of my thinking or mindset of spring fishing in this area. First of all, welcome to the podcast, gentlemen.
Thank you, Tony.
And, you know, Marcus will be joining us here shortly. I think he's dropping his kids off at school. There's snow on the ground. I think the snow followed me down here to South Dakota, but it's going to be nicer today. It's going to be 50 degrees. We had a great day yesterday. That was really fun. I don't know about you guys, but the anticipation of driving out here in the morning, the excitement level for me was at a freaking 10. I mean, I was so jacked just to get on the water. This was my first opportunity to open water fish. I'm off the ice, finally back in the swing of things. My health is better. If you listen to the podcast last week, I struggled to get through it. I was so sick. This week, I'm feeling better. The fish are biting, and we pounded them yesterday on plastics. It was really fun.
Yeah, and like Tony said, I mean, this place is pretty awesome. So, I mean, we usually go one or two places every spring, you know, whether that be, you know, out to Green Bay, Econo area or something like that, or Rainy River, like you said, Chamberlain. The thing here is that we've noticed, I guess, fishing yesterday. I mean, what did we see? One boat?
Yeah.
I mean, really, there's all the lakes are wide open. We didn't see a trailer at any access. Granted, it was cold yesterday. You know, water temps were between 37, 38, but we still had a pretty good day. Didn't have to deal with any traffic, any people, no lines at the accesses. You know, so it was kind of just fun and relaxing just to go out and just kind of fish and new water, learn new things, do new stuff, and they were biting. So it was fun.
I could not believe the lack of traffic on the lake, first of all, and of course the lack of just boats around the area. I think a lot of people, when they think of spring fishing in South Dakota, their brain automatically goes to Chamberlain, Oahe. You know, their mindset's on the river. They don't think about these lakes. And, you know, the whole drive here, all these little potholes, they're absolutely stuffed full of walleyes. We were hitting pre-spawners yesterday. And granted, yesterday was a little bit cold. But still, you should have seen boats around and people kind of...
You would think.
You know, if people were coming out here for spring fishing, just like the Rainy River, they fish regardless of weather, right? And we saw nobody.
Yeah.
We saw no other boats on any other lakes. And that's what I mean about the overlooked aspect of this location is like, this is definitely now on my radar. That the fact that you don't have to fight lines. Like, I love the Rainy River. Honestly, like last week's podcast, I was talking that I would probably be doing the podcast from the Rainy River. I love it up there so much. But I refuse to go up there on the weekend because it's just nuts. I can't stand the crowds, you know, I can't stand being blocked out. I can't stand, you know, having to, you know, bike back to my trailer or walk back a mile and get in a line of people a mile long. Yeah, it's, it's a little bit fun in the spring when there's, especially during the week when there's not that much traffic, where you're waving to people, and you're talking to people and you're excited about fishing. But I've had so many times up in the Rainy where it's cold, like yesterday, you're jammed into a certain area because the river's not quite open yet. You just have a certain stretch of river. So everyone's fishing where the fish are biting, or they're on top of each other. And then you got sturgeon fishermen and walleye fishermen. And so for me to come out here and not see another boat, super exciting.
Yeah, for me too, is the fish themselves out here. It's not overly complicated in April. You just need husky jerks, ripping wraps, a 1/4 ounce jig, and a mooch minnow or a jerk minnow, and you're pretty much set. They're all pretty shallow and they're all really willing to bite, and they haven't been bothered, since wintertime.
I couldn't believe yesterday the first clunk of a jig. Usually you think spring, and I fished all over, and I tend to fish, and we did yesterday. We fished a lot more aggressive than most people would think spring fishing when surface temps are 37, 38 degrees. We were snap jigging plastics. When Marcus gets here, we'll talk a little bit. He threw a rip and wrap. I was so mad at these guys. I said, what do I need to bring out there? I talked to Marcus, I talked to you, and I like to be prepared. So half the fun of going on a fishing trip is getting your stuff ready. And last week's podcast, I talked about how I've been going through my tackle, cleaning my tackle trays, getting things ready. Well, these guys are like, all you need is a 1/4 ounce jig and a plastic. Maybe throw some husky jerks in. We might throw some crankbaits. That piqued my interest because I love casting crankbaits for fish shallow. So I was like, heck yeah. So I went all in on the husky jerks. I went a step further even with that, where I went husky jerks, shadow wraps, Mavericks, because I was like, hey, if we're throwing jerk baits, I'm throwing in what I am comfortable throwing. But all of a sudden, Marcus pulls out a rip and wrap. I'm like, are you kidding me? I love rip and wrap fishing, and I didn't throw any rip and wraps in. Didn't need to. But, the funny part is, of course, he popped the first fish right away, And when he gets here, we'll elaborate on that. But, almost immediately, I threw out a 1/4 ounce moon eye. I had a jerk minnow on a Crush City jerk minnow, and Mitch and I were snapping it pretty good to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
I probably had shorter pops than Mitch, but then boom, my braid jumped, and I was not expecting that bite. Normally in the spring, it's a drag, and you just literally, when you go to lift, they're there, right? That's the typical cold water spring bite. Even a lot of times in Green Bay with rip and wraps, as hard as those fish hit it, and as deep as that bait is in their gullet, they don't hit it that hard. It's just like weight there. Rainy River, same thing. Last year we were pulling, 4-inch Crush City Mayors up current, just dragging them, right? But when the fish would grab it, they'd just grab it. You didn't know if you were hung up on a rock or a fish. You kind of leaned on it, almost like you were, live bait rigging, right? It's just that really soft, subtle bite. That wasn't the case yesterday. We did have a few just pick it up off the bottom, but I had a few clunk it really hard, where I was like, that's what gets you excited about open water fishing. And instantly, my mindset went away from being mad about not bringing rip and wraps to all dialed in on throwing plastics. And you become a believer really quickly. And the fact that we did buy minnows, and Mitch threw minnows a few times, but the plastics and the artificial baits definitely outperformed.
Didn't get bit on a minnow.
No, and that happens a lot. That happens more than people think. I think we as Minnesotans think, oh my gosh, we need live bait. I even told Chris on the way here. Chris is like, you're buying minnows, and I'm like, it's super cold out. It's sort of that nookie or comfort blanket, if you will. You have to bring minnows because you have, just me, the Minnesotan. I grew up meat and potatoes, jigging a minnow guy. You have to pick up minnows. So Mitch and I grabbed some fatheads, and they weren't working. We've seen that happen out in Green Bay too, where it's like we've bought minnows just because we're like, hey, none of these guys fish live bait. We're gonna kill them on minnows, and they don't touch them.
It's odd.
Yeah, I wonder what Marcus's thought on is. But for me, every time I've been out here, I haven't needed minnows. It's always been artificials, and we've done very well with it. So just never done it.
It's that reactionary strike. It goes back, I would say for me, sort of, every angler has their sort of learning curve when it comes to different techniques, different locations, how to fish in dirt, and how to fish certain presentations in different water temps, right? And, for me, I always had the mindset when I was younger that when it's cold, you fish slow. It's sort of, I was taught to drag a jig and it's a slow pop and let it sit there. Don't move it. Let the minnow kind of do its thing. Then you move it and you let it sit there. It wasn't until really I started, because even on the Rainy River, when I fished with my Uncle Gary, it was just like those short pops and you barely move that jig, or it was a drag, and it wasn't until I really started fishing Green Bay where I fell in love with rip and wrap fishing, where it was like, wow, you can fish extremely aggressive in really shallow water and catch fish when surface temperatures are below 40 degrees. I mean, it opened up my eyes to that whole realm of fishing aggressively with artificials. Okay. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to expand out from rip and wraps. I'm going to experiment with plastics, with hair jigs, with crankbaits, and I'm going to start fishing them faster than you think you should be fishing them. Even trolling, like you always think, oh, when the water's cold, you got to stay at 1 mile an hour, 1.2. There's times where, I learned I could really pick up my speed, and those fish were aggressive. Look yesterday on forward-facing sonar, even some of the fish that didn't bite, we were in 5-6 feet of water. I was throwing a 1/4 ounce moon eye jig with the Crust City jerk, just that minnow profile plastic, and I had one chase it right to the trolling motor. I mean, right up to the trolling motor.
Yeah.
And it just shows you that aggressive nature of the fish, even though how cold it was. Now, we had some fish that were sluggish that did, that chased and wouldn't bite. But then when you got into the kind of those little bitey areas, most of which was really shallow, and ding, 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 most of which was on the downward side, that warm water, whatever warm surface water remains is always going to be on that downward side. It was fun.
Yeah.
Kind of the end of the day on a sort of a high note yesterday was fun for me, because we did get a little grindy. We got into some, just to kind of lay it out for the listeners, we got into a really good bite that I thought was, dang, things were clicking. And then we hit a bunch of spots where it wasn't clicking. And that's typical, on bodies of water that all three of us have never fished. Marcus jumped in the boat with us in the morning, but he had some family stuff going on and some things, he's got a busy guide schedule coming up. So he's trying to pack everything in as well. And for him to jump in with us was super cool. We fished for a little bit, and then we had to drop Marcus off and then go hit a bunch of spots that weren't clicking. That's all part of sort of that search. And I don't mind that, that's just fishing in a nutshell. Some anglers have to be told like everywhere to go, and they have to be on fish the entire time when they're on a trip. Part of the experience of exploring, like we did yesterday, of old road beds and points and things like that, that was fun. But then to get back on the fish again was amazing.
Another thing that's overlooked in this area too is you can just pull out. You can just trailer your boat, pull out, go to a different lake. So if one lake isn't happening or it's just slow or whatever reason, there's a dozen other lakes within a few miles of each other, and just go to a different lake. It's incredible. And no one will be on that one either.
Well, and there's so many bodies of water. I mean, just driving to the lake we did yesterday, and sort of, it's spring fishing. The ice just went out, a week and a half ago here. So Marcus is pretty much throwing a dart at a dartboard as well. I mean, he's just like, yeah, let's go to this lake. I heard they were catching a few off the shore, off the riprap. So we threw a dart at a dartboard. If we had gotten out there and it was pitiful, you literally pick up and move 3-4 miles, and there's how many dozens of other lakes and opportunities there. Even on the way here, going through, before we got to Waubay and some of these areas, Mitch and I were pulling over to check water clarity. We just were geeking out. I mean, everywhere we went, it's like between the pheasants that we saw and, the different potholes that we could fish, it's just a super cool area.
Yeah, it's that time of year. I mean, you got ducks in every pond, yeah, it's a fun drive out here even, and like for us out of central Minnesota, it's no different than, it's actually closer than going to Chamberlain or Oconto or I mean, heaven forbid, Erie, right? So, I mean, this is just a hop, skip, and a jump to come over here and do this. And like you said, the opportunity is endless. You have so many bodies of water to fish. And I think that's part of the reason why it's not overpressured. You don't see that many boats. These fish are willing to eat rip and wraps, plastics. You don't need the minnows, which is awesome this time of year too, because you don't have to have wet hands and be cold. And you can just fish aggressive and fast and not have to be rebaiting. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, after yesterday we got in, and I just said I'm pumped to have another place on the spring list, that we can go use.
I was just pumped to catch a fish on a jig. I was pumped to catch a fish on a long rod for, it's been a long winter, and yeah, we had an excellent winter. I would say, I've gotten asked a lot about this winter and, just kind of how the winter went, whether it's guiding or fishing or whatever. I would say on the spectrum of, my 20 plus years of guiding full time, on the spectrum of winters, it was right up there in the top 10. I would say maybe even top 5 as far as no snow cover. We had ice early. It seemed like the ice kind of went away when it should, though, end of March. But all in all, it was an excellent ice season. There was a lot of people fishing. I had a ton of customers. The fish were biting. Just kind of that whole round. We only had one real cold snap. I mean, it was a great winter to be outside fishing and whatever. So given all of that, yes, it was an awesome winter. But by the time spring hits, man, I'm ready to hit open water. I've drilled enough holes. We were talking about in the boat, just the clunk of that jig. And next fall, come November, I'm ready to grab the Strike Master and I'm ready to get my ice fishing gear ready. But you start getting into April and we still have ice in northern Minnesota. It was so nice just to see water, first of all. It's like good for the soul. But then to have a walleye clunk, a leadhead jig was right up there on my list. Hey, we're going to take a short break. Marcus Quam is in the house. He just joined us here. He's got his Mountain Dew ready. I know we are all jacked up. The sun is shining outside. We got a little bit of snow on the ground. We're super pumped to get out fishing. Let's catch up a little bit with Marcus. We want to talk more about fishing in this area. There's so many spring opportunities here in South Dakota. Stay tuned. We got more dialed into angling after this.
OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you're after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's South Shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site, full-service bar and restaurant. The two beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com. Okay, so joining the podcast now is Marcus Quam. I know he had some family obligations, some things to pack in the spring. He has a busy guide schedule all season long, and for him to carve out a couple of days of fishing with us is great. Good friend of mine. He's no stranger to the podcast, to Dialed In Angling. He's one of the most premier guides here in the Wabash Webster area. Marcus, thanks for joining, bud.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
He's got his Mountain Dew in hand. We got snow on the ground. Who cares? The sun is shining. We're going fishing. Before you got here, we talked about the overlooked aspect of this area and how, for me, like when it comes to spring fishing, I'm always thinking Rainy River, Green Bay, the river, Chamberlain, Oahe. And it seems like it gets overlooked. And then, driving out here and seeing how many lakes, especially as you pull into Wabash, and it's like, wow, I forget how many lakes are around here. Even though I was just here this winter, right? You forget how many lakes, how many potholes, and how many opportunities there are in this area for some amazing fishing. And really, people coming from the Twin Cities, it's not that far. It's much closer than going to Green Bay, or for them to the Rainy River. The Rainy River's closer for me because I live up north, but like literally it's way closer than going to the Rainy River for those folks, and certainly a lot closer than heading out to the river. We had a great day yesterday fishing, and just the opportunities. The wheels have been churning all night long, and this morning, like, I am jacked to get out fishing.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why you're seeing the lack of people is there are so many spring destinations that are only good in the spring, where this area kind of carries over more than just a spring bite. It kind of lasts through the summer. So people might go and do their spring trip somewhere else, and they know they can fall back on this in a couple weeks or a few weeks later or whatever.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of lack of, fishermen early out here right now. There's a lot of those hardcore guys are going out and trying, a Green Bay or Rainy River or Erie or Missouri River or something like that.
You and I talked all winter long. I know you had a great winter like I did. And the first lake we went to, we're cruising across the basin, and there's just pods of perch we're seeing. I know you spent a ton of time chasing perch. How was your winter? How did it end up overall?
Overall, it was a pretty great season. I would say the perch fishing was a little bit better this year than it was the previous year. Obviously, we have a ton of walleyes in all our lakes. I think our state does a great job of stocking the walleyes. I don't have much to complain about. You mentioned lack of snow. We hardly had any snow out here. And our ice season was closer to normal. I would say, we got a full 60 days in a guiding pretty easy after Christmas, but when our ice decides to go out here, it goes pretty quick with the lakes being shallow and more mud and cattails and stuff. It soaks up all that heat from the sun. So it doesn't last near as long as what it does in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, we were just talking about this morning over coffee that, I don't know, at home right now, we still have 2+ feet of ice. And the fact that you get down here, it's wide open. Well, a lot of that has to do with the wind and, what's around it. If you can get that ice kind of broke loose from the shoreline, it starts moving. You add wind into the mix, rain. I grew up on a lake river system, and my dad was always like, it's not going to be ice out until we have those overnight temperatures that stay above freezing. And that's sort of when our ice goes out in northern Minnesota. But here, because I think that ground stays warmer. Look at last night, we had snow, but like on the driveways and everything, it's all melted. I think that ground stays a lot warmer than you think. And then it starts moving that ice, and lo and behold, you have cattails and things that hold heat, wood. Look at what we fished around yesterday, those road beds. They're not that deep, and that sun penetrates that. They warm up quicker, and that ice goes so much quicker than you think. Even though you guys had just as thick of ice and just sort of the same type of climate in winter, it goes so much faster.
It does. It's kind of interesting. I think it was maybe 2 weeks from when I ended our ice fishing to the first time I got the boat out. I think I've been in the boat like 7 times already this spring out here. And, it sounds like a lot, but we've had a lot of wind and crappy weather in between. So I would say it's average, but yeah, you can start on one lake, you go south of town 45 minutes and it's, all open, you're ice fishing there, and you go north of town and there's still ice fishing a half an hour north. So that is kind of the cool thing about being in Webster, is there's like a little bit of elevation change or something where I don't have to travel too far either way to kind of be in kind of completely different stage of the spring or the spawn or whatever. I can start catching the fish south of town. And as they start spawning, I can kind of move my way back north up here to town. And as those fish are spawning here, then revert back to south. And those fish are in the post-spawn stage where they're firing better than what they are right here in town or north of town.
I would have an extremely hard time focusing, okay? Because I love ditch fishing, and I have adult ADD to begin with. So like if my wife sent me to the store, or I had a project at home, or I had to go to the hardware store, and I'd see like a culvert with some current running, I would have a jig rod in my truck at all times, and I would never get anything done. At home, we do a lot of ditch fishing, we call it. And so we pull up alongside the road, and where areas where lakes come up there, or rivers, or maybe you have 2 lakes that connect together. We go and we crappie fish. We spring crappie fish in Minnesota. Obviously, we can't walleye fish in inland lakes and catch and release. And I want to get into that topic on this podcast as well. But I ditch fish, and we catch crappies in the spring. When COVID hit and my kids were locked down. We live in the country. We weren't locked down. We went fishing every day and we tried different ditch spots. I actually pulled up, Onyx Fish at maps, and actually it was before Onyx Fish. It was Onyx Hunt. And I pull Onyx maps up and look at different lakes where there was either current or where the lakes would come close to the road. I would look for public land opportunities where I could go ditch fish, where it was cattails or adjacent to deep water, maybe on north ends of lakes where there was a road access or somewhere I could get in and ditch fish. And I found a ton of different lakes. Me and my kids went every day to a new destination in Minnesota. Well, this area with all of the road opportunities are endless as far as catching walleyes. Now, instead of crappie fishing, I would be walleye fishing. I mean, we do it in Devil's Lake. We do it in South Dakota when we go pheasant hunting. We bring our rods with because there's that shore fishing opportunity that's super cool and super unique. And if I lived here, I'd never get anything done. I'm just telling you right now, it would be endless. I would have a pile of jigs in my truck and I would be fishing like every shore spot. And it was funny, like how we ended the day yesterday. Guess what? You could have shore fished there. Like people were honking at us on the highway. We're catching them along the riprap. The wind was blowing in there. There was some current coming through the culvert. Just your textbook shore fishing spot that you would go to.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of opportunity. Like you said, you don't need a boat to do a lot of this stuff out here in the spring. I mean, you can probably fish easy a month or longer without a boat and still have really good success in the area, which is cool. I don't get out and do the shore fishing like I used to. I just kind of got limited time, and some of those spots you got to get out there a little bit earlier. But I know a lot of my buddies do it, and they have plenty of success.
Well, that's another thing in this area, right? So you have a blow day, and you're out on Erie, you're done for that day. Here, I mean, you could have and you don't want to put the boat. It's just going to be a nasty day out there. Well, you can just go hunker down on a riprap shoreline right off the highway and just fish that way too, and just stay comfortable.
Well, and we sort of. I was kind of eyeing up that spot at the beginning of the day. I even told Marcus, I was like, "What about that culvert over there?" But we kind of went there at the end of the day to sort of get out of the wind. The wind had really switched out of the north and was really hucking into that shoreline where that roadbed was. And so, I'm casting into the wind. Mitch and I were taking turns. Like he'd go to the back of the boat. All our hands were freezing. None of us love wearing gloves when we're fishing, right? And so it started snowing like really heavily. And that wind picked up a lot. And so, I looked at Mitch, I was like, that culvert's kind of out of the wind there. Like, let's hit that before we go in. And then we started catching them there. So then we didn't want to go in, but just to get out of the wind there. But, going along and driving along all these little potholes, if the wind's hucking in, you can go to the next one and you can kind of get out of the wind in the next one. And so super cool just the amount of fishing opportunity. Now, before I get into sort of the catch and release stuff when it comes to Minnesota, I also want to talk a little bit about, there's a lot of talk and controversy. I talked about it last week about, some sort of guide rules or mandating some sort of guide, license or something in Minnesota. I know South Dakota doesn't have it. North Dakota does. And so I want to talk a little bit with you, Marcus, about that. And I want to get your guys' input, Mitch and Chris. I don't want to go into huge depth as far as guide licensing because I did cover that last week. But throughout the season, I want to get on air, not off air conversations. I want to talk to different guides throughout the state, throughout the region, and ask them what their thoughts are on guide licensing. Now, I'll just give you my 2 cents, okay, because I want to clarify a few things from last week, because I know some people commented online, some people commented on Facebook, on Instagram. I want to clarify a few things from my perspective. I want to see a guide license in Minnesota. I really do. But I don't want to see this, huge drawn out fishery, like people were jumping on there. Well, guides should be required to only fish certain lakes. I don't want to see any restriction. I live in Minnesota and I live in this area because I can fish all these different lakes. I don't want to see any sort of restrictions from lake association owners, from the DNR, from people regulating and mandating me to where I can and cannot fish. I love this area because we can fish anywhere. There's other states where if you fish a certain lake, they lock up your boat because of invasives or whatever else. I don't want to see that. I know when invasives hit in Minnesota, there was people lock up the landing. This is our lake. They're polluting our lake, our lake, our lake. It's not your lake. It's everyone's lake, right? Same with being able to come out to South Dakota. you said, the fisheries do a great job out here, and they do a fantastic job in the Dakotas of regulating their fisheries, of stocking, of just staying on top of it. In Minnesota, I would like to see the guide license, but I literally just want to see a couple things. Proof of insurance. Okay, maybe some sort of first aid CPR training requirement, a small fee, and that's about it. I don't think that it has to be this long, drawn-out thing where you have to record all your fish. You're limited to fishing certain areas. You can only fish these lakes. Only a certain amount of guides are ponded here. I mean, this thing could snowball pretty quickly. And anytime you get the government involved, it really muddies things up. And so I see where people say, hey, let's not have anything, right? I'm fine with the way it is. If it's going to snowball and escalate to the point where there's so many people involved and, they're basically just taking our money, then I'm not for it. But if it's something simple where we have to provide proof, I just want to see some sort of level of legitimacy to guiding. I've heard it brought up on other podcasts, because when I did mine, I heard some other people talking about it online. It's sort of this debate got sparked because of a DNR meeting that took place in Brainerd. Okay. And so they were talking about, hey, if you cut hair in the state of Minnesota, you need a license, right? You need a license to cut hair, to do beauty products. You need a license to sell vacuums. Okay. I'm all for having something simple, but I don't want to see it escalated. What are your guys' thoughts? Let's start with Marcus, and then we could go to Mitch and Chris.
No, I agree. It could get really muddy really fast with a lot of this stuff. I mean, everybody's an armchair biologist and, the different things. And so I think everything here, the fishing's still good. I mean, do guides have an impact on the fishery? Maybe, but you're taking people that are buying a license to go fishing. I'm not catching the fish for them. I mean, they're coming here, they're spending money, they're bringing a lot of money to, Webster. Just look at what we have in town. Well, we got 4 or 5 different restaurants. I mean, and we only have 1,800 people here. So the tourism's a big thing. But for some of us that are trying to make a living doing this and not just kind of part-time or making a little bit of side money, something for a license just to show proof of insurance and simple things like that would help, because how expensive it is to run your own business. I mean, you're running commercial insurance on your trucks and your boats and your equipment, and all that adds up and takes off the, right off the top right away. So, and I know there's probably a decent amount of guys that are probably not abiding by that. And if something happens, it's what makes the rest of us look bad, and
that's my whole take on it, is one bad apple can spoil the whole group. Right. And so then that captures headlines, and how social media is, things can really escalate and take off. And then a group of people get lumped together, even though they're probably not even associated or maybe not even know each other. And so that's where I'm at with the whole thing. It's not that I want to see this thing escalate into, a bunch of red tape and government, so I'm glad, you're kind of on that same line now. But how do you set the mandate? Who sets the mandate? Who starts doing it? And at what point, because obviously no one in this room is going to have much of a say in government, so it gets put into legislators' hands, lawmakers' hands. Who knows where that goes, especially in Minnesota, man. It can get pretty crazy quickly. I mean, I just know like some of the bills that try to get pushed through that are related to either the outdoors or the Minnesota DNR get lumped into all of these different bills and weird things that happen when it comes to lawmaking. And sort of that's my fear, is like there's some sort of backdoor thing, because maybe someone has a cabin on Gull Lake or whatever, and they hate guides, right? I always hear that a lot, where all the guides are ruining the lake. Are they really? Or is it, the guy that goes out every single day and gets his limit of walleyes and perch from that particular lake? I think he's having more of an impact than the guides that may frequent there maybe once, twice, 10 times a year. I really think, just because you see a guide vehicle there or somebody with a wrap truck, they're not having as big an impact. And a lot of us, I really feel like, are better stewards of the lake than a lot of others as far as releasing big fish, cognizant of, spawning opportunities and spawning fish and not over harvesting. And it's our livelihood. I look at it all the time when it comes to harvest. I'm very cautious of like the different lakes I go to when it comes to harvest, the clientele that I take. I have certain customers I don't take anymore because all they want to do is take, and I don't want that. I want people to have a good fishing experience.
Yeah, I mean, you want everybody to catch fish, but you don't want a bucket fisherman that, can we get a limit of this? That's not what a guide service is for. You're just giving them the opportunity, and hopefully you're giving them a chance to catch fish. I know it's a lot cheaper to go buy the fish at the grocery store than it is to hire one of us to go get them. So I'd rather take people that are out to enjoy the sport. And if you get a limit of fish to have a couple meals off, that's a bonus. I mean, I know as you, just as much as me, we love to eat fish, but when we're going to go eat some, we just keep a few for the family and have them fresh, and probably don't have any in the freezer at all.
Right on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess circling back to like the licensing part of it, I'm definitely in for insurance 100%, because if something bad were to happen, your people should be protected if you're going to be running some sort of business where you're guiding. I guess for me, if it came to licensing with government involvement, I would like to know where that money's going, right? I don't want it going into some general fund. I want it to come back to the lakes then, come back to, and this appeases lake associations, right? Maybe it's, somewhere needs landing improvements, things like that. Let's take that money and put it somewhere where we can see it being used, again, to appease lake associations, or however you want to look at it, or used by the DNR for net catch data, things like this, right? Just put it back to where the money came from, I guess, is my only thing on it when you're talking government oversight.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a dog in the fight, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. A lot of my friends are guides, and a lot of my friends are not. Maybe a license gives, from the client aspect, gives a little bit more legitimacy to them and a little reassurance and confidence that, hey, I'm going out with a licensed guide, as opposed to just someone who's not. You get government involved, especially in Minnesota, you worry about it turning into a money grab, and they just kind of tend to do that across the board. So you would worry about that as well. But I don't know. That's a tough conversation.
It is. And that's why I wanted to clarify it in this episode versus last week. Because, I had people comment on both sides of the table where they were all for it. They were against it. People are jumping on me for saying, hey, this is, why would you want to get the government involved? I just want to state my case, that, I want to see some sort of legitimacy. I see other states. I go to other states, and I know we're in South Dakota right now, but South Dakota is kind of like Minnesota. They don't require a guide license. North Dakota does. And, when you go to other states, you see on their website, fully licensed captain, whatever. Minnesota, South Dakota, I mean, you do see it a little bit, but you don't see it because it's not required. And, so it's a topic of conversation. I don't want to get down the wormhole any further. I just wanted to get Marcus's take on it, you guys' take, Mitch guides as well. And I wanted to have some clarification to what I brought up last week. And I'll continue to do it throughout the summer as I interview guides, and I want to get their take. I want to understand what they're thinking, where their mindset is, because I know there's a lot of people that feel just like me, where they're like, I'm surprised we don't have some. And a lot of my customers are surprised that there's not some sort of guide license in Minnesota. They're really, I've had people bring it up in the boat. I've had after last week's conversation on the podcast, that when I brought it up, I had customers text me and email me about it. And so, yeah, I just think, we're at a point that at least we can bring it up in conversation, whether it goes anywhere or not. It's just healthy fishing conversation. I'm with Mitch. I want to see all of our resource dollars go back to the resources. I think Minfish is helping with that. This next week on the 17th, Minfish is meeting in Alexandria. I know there's a lot of people that are excited about that. It's a group of people that are passionate about keeping that money where it should go. And I'm, at first when Minfish was formed, I said, I talked to Ron Scher about it. I talked to Al Linder, and they said, we'd like you to be a lifetime member. I put my money in, and yeah, I'm happy. I get their newsletter. I'm excited about, some of the improvement things that they've been able to allocate dollars towards. I know a couple ramps that Minfish was at least the DNR decided to allocate that money, but Minfish was the voice for that, where a couple of the ramps were terrible, and now they're beautiful. They've fixed up those ramps. There's access to the lakes, and a couple of the lakes that I'm talking about, I don't want to name them, but one of the lakes is a really busy lake that had just a terrible access, that it was hard to get big boats in. And now it's just beautiful. Great parking areas. They cut down some trees where you can, actually navigate around and get into those lakes. And now I fish those lakes a lot more because it's not such a hassle getting into that body of water. And so let's get back to the conversation of what we're going to do today. I know we're jacked. A couple more minutes of the podcast and I'm ready to crawl out of my skin. I've had a pot of coffee, the sun's shining. Like, I am so birdie right now to get out and fish again today. Other than not having rip and wraps with, I can muster through that. When it comes to kind of this time frame right now, surface temps are 38 degrees. We were catching some males that were milking yesterday. We maybe only got one female yesterday, but it's hard because we just picked a lake and threw a dart at a dartboard. Let's just lay out a time frame or a timeline over the next few weeks that if listeners are here, they could get a hold of you, Marcus, or if maybe they want to experience this Bay Area for themselves. What's sort of the timeline over the next few weeks as far as fishing, not just for walleyes, but panfish as well? I mean, are there other opportunities around here? I know driving over Big Stone, I told Mitch, I'm like, man, I'd love to stop here and do a little pan fishing on my way home. There's so many different fishing opportunities as you make it this way. What's sort of the timeline that you'd lay out here for the people for the next few weeks?
Walleye bite's going to continue and be good. We have a handful of lakes that are pretty good for smallmouth bass. So I would say if I'm going to do anything other than walleye fish, it'd be bass fishing. One of my guides and I was out, probably a week and a half. I think we ended up with like 20 smallies. We just stumbled upon a school that was next to a rock pile. And then it turned out to be a smallmouth day instead of a walleye day. So that was really fun. Right now we're fishing slower. We're fishing jigs and minnows, jigs and plastics, a little bit on rip and wraps. But as the season goes on here, we're going to be able to get more aggressive with some bigger plastics, some paddle tails, jerk baits, and it's a great time and a great place to be.
I might throw a jerk bait on today and actually throw a jerk bait. I brought 3 boxes of jerk baits and I love jerk bait fishing. I know, I have to admit jerk baits were my secret weapon for a while where I just didn't really want to tell people because I fished jerk baits so extensively on Mille Lacs Lake that I saw how powerful they were. And, Mitch knows, Nick knows. I mean, some of my close friends, we've talked about it, but like I kept it so close to my chest because I was like, it is so fun fishing jerk baits for walleyes, first of all. But second of all, it's just such a powerful tool. And now with forward-facing sonar, people can see just what I've seen for years on Mille Lacs as far as what a fish catching tool a jerk bait is, not just throughout the summer months, but in the spring and in the fall. I filmed Midwest Outdoors when Shadow Wraps came out. I did an episode in the fall where I just absolutely teed off on them with Shadow Wraps for walleyes, and I've loved jerkbait fishing for a while. Now with the Maverick 110s, all the different profiles, you still have the classics like Husky Jerks, obviously Shadow Wraps. I think I'm going to throw a jerkbait today. I'm going to jig fish in the morning, but at some point throughout the day, I got to put a jerkbait on, especially like yesterday afternoon when we saw some of those fish that were up off the bottom. I was this close. I mean, if it weren't for the end of the day and we were cold and it was snowing, if I was like pre-fishing for a tournament or like, we were going to fish for another hour or so, I would have definitely tied on a jerkbait.
Yeah, I love fishing jerk baits, and I think in our area they don't get fish as much as some of the others, or guys don't have confidence in it. But I'm seeing more and more on little Facebook reels or different things, guys talking about them now. And that was one thing I noticed when I started using forward-facing sonar was like the draw power on a jerk bait or a crankbait is I don't know, 5-10 times the power of what a jig and plastic is. I mean, what you got to get within a handful of feet of fish with a jig and minnow, jig and plastic. And when you're throwing a jerkbait, you can see those fish coming from, 10, 15, even 20 foot away if it's calm and they're hearing that clack and, the noise of the rattle or whatever. So it is pretty fun.
When you and I were out in Oahe last fall and we were watching fish chase our crankbaits, it reminded me a lot of casting and watching them. And then like, you forget how many fish, like, wow, they see that crankbait and they feel it on their lateral line and they go after it. And it was amazing. Like, we were using the gold miners, right? And that big dig of that rattle of that bait. I mean, those fish would draw and we'd see them, okay. So we had the forward facing sonar pointed backwards. So your cone angle is very narrow, even though you're on your bait. And when those fish would come in on the side and they'd swoop in, you're like, oh, here they go. And it adds another layer of fun to fishing. And so watching them like on a jerk bait or on a crankbait, and to be able to come out to an area like this and actually have success doing it and getting confident in it, that's the name of the game. If you want to get really good at something, you have to go somewhere where you're going to be confident, where you're going to catch fish. I say it all the time. And when I'm doing seminars, you can't just go, to Shields or Bass Pro or wherever and buy a bunch of baits and then expect to be super successful at fishing that technique anywhere you go. You have to go to a location where you're going to be successful. And then the light bulbs start going off in your mind where, oh man, I did that out in Webster. I can do that here, or I can do that there. And, doesn't matter the technique, but especially throwing crankbaits or jerk baits, go to a lake like this in the spring. And then after opener hits, you go to Mille Lacs Lake and you do that same thing and you're going to have success, or Leech Lake or Winnie, kind of those shallow water bites that will occur there. And then you start having success there. And then you just start building and on that. So,
yeah, I learned the power of the Husky jerk years ago in Hayward on the chip. And my favorite lure by far is the HJ12. It by far is my favorite lure. It's just so much fun. And that's translated here too. It's the same thing, early fish or up shallow, and they love jerk baits, and it's by far the most fun way to catch them for me.
I would say, rank lures historically, right? Because there's always new product coming out from Rapala, new colors, new jigs, there's always something new. But if you look back and you look in a Rapala catalog, an original floater, a shad wrap, a Husky jerk, and even, obviously now a jigging wrap, that's been around forever. I mean, if you had just those 4 lures, like if you had, that was it, you could do some serious damage on all different species of fish. Like everybody always asks, well, if you only had one bait to use, you can't do that to me, right? Because I like fishing all sorts of different techniques. But I can think back when I was a kid, I grew up on a lake river system and casting from shore. That's probably where my love of casting from shore comes from. Where the river dumped out or where the river dumped in, I'd throw an original floater, dude, all night long. I'd sit out there in a full moon and catch walleyes one after another on my parents' lake. I told you guys yesterday, we built a little rock pile off our dock. I'm sure the statute of limitations have run out as far as building structure, but we built a little rock pile when I was a kid off my parents' dock, and I'd throw a shad wrap out there, and you could feel that shad wrap hitting those rocks, and boom, you'd catch walleyes off our dock. And so throwing a Husky jerk or throwing a shadow wrap or a Maverick 110, I have that same feeling. I love casting crankbaits. I remember when Jim Linder and the Linders did a show. I think it was on Lake Travers or Big Stone. I was trying to scope down the background. They never gave me the real insight, but they were either here or there, that location, or they were in Waw Bay. I couldn't tell, but it's sort of that look. They were on the South Dakota side somewhere, and they weren't that far over the border. But I remember they were throwing shad wraps. Do you remember that episode? And Jimmy had one follow one to the boat, and he did like a figure 8. Oh my gosh, dude. I changed all my braid. I got rods that I could throw shad wraps, and I was all in on throwing shad wraps. And it was super fun. And this was way before forward facing sonar. I got into really throwing shad wraps. When it was super windy on Mille Lacs, I was still throwing an anchor at the time. We didn't have spot lock. And I would get in these areas instead of bobber fishing. I'd have my customers bobber fishing, and I was throwing shad wraps and doing it extremely well. And so you get into these areas out here where there's tons of riprap along the roads and stuff. And my mind just goes crankbait mode. And you want to have the best time you could possibly have ever catching fish, tying a crankbait.
Yeah. My first trip out here, that's what we did. We put the trolling motor down and just bang shoreline for a weekend with shad wraps, and it was super fun, very effective.
I think that's why rip and wraps sort of fall into that category too. Even though you're jigging them, you're sort of working that crankbait back, and you can feel that, that buzz of that bait. long before Green Bay, actually, my original rip and wrap fish catching happened in Iowa. Rip and wraps sort of were new. And Dan Johnston, actually, he works for St. Croix. I've known him for years. He's a really good angler, but he's just from that area. And I went down there for this writers event. They wanted me, it was like an Aglow writers event or something. They wanted me to find walleyes down in Iowa. We get down there, it was in September. Surface temp was 80 degrees. And I was like, okay. So I put the lead core on. I actually had, I was pulling around some tail dancers. I forget all the baits. I was pulling shad wraps, jointed shad wraps. And I was catching everything but walleyes. I caught white crappies. I caught a buffalo carp. I caught everything but a walleye. And I literally had like half a day to figure this out before I'm supposed to take writers out walleye fishing. I bumped into Dan and I was like, hey, yeah, I'm catching tons of fish. These writers going to catch fish, but I cannot find the walleyes. He's like, wherever there's rock, he's like, there's walleyes on the rock. I would throw like those new rip and wraps or anything like a lipless crankbait if you got one. Well, I had a pile of them because they had just come out. And I was like, okay, rock. So I'm looking around for rock on side imaging, and there's no rock on this whole lake. And then all of a sudden I go under a bridge, and I'm like, oh, there's rock. There's rip wrap. So I immediately started thinking of the Dakotas, and I spun around, and first cast with a rip and wrap, I got a 24-inch walleye. And I was like, I almost hit the bank, and I caught that fish. And everything was on the bank. Catfish, bass, walleyes. Everything was up there because of the gizzard shad, and anywhere there was rip and wrap. So I looked like a hero with a brand new Rapala bait rip and wrap with these writers, and we're smashing fish. Like, it was so much fun. I didn't want to leave. That I, again, like talking about layers of learning as an angler, when it's 80 degrees surface temperature and walleyes are in less than 2 feet of water, I would have never guessed that at that point in my life, because at that point I was thinking lead core trolling. We're in the middle of summer. I had come from Mille Lacs. Everything was out in the basin. You had to search for these fish that were out in the basin. That's where the bait fish are. That wasn't the case down there. And I fell in love with rip and wraps. And then lo and behold, I go out to Green Bay, and like, now you're catching 12 pounders on them. You get here and you talk about the fishing opportunities. And, today was a blast, or yesterday was a blast getting them on jigs and plastics, but I will be tying on a crankbait at some point. I have to. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Marcus, if people want to get a hold of you, if we want to get out here over the next few weeks, I know your schedule is about to book up in a big time way, but how can they get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is give me a call at 605-940-9943, and it's realtherapyguideservice.com.
Awesome. Come out to South Dakota. If you want to keep a couple walleyes, you can. If you want to come out and just whale on them, it's open. We need to get this in Minnesota. They passed catch and release fishing for bass. I think it's time for walleyes. That's a discussion for another day. Thanks for tuning in to the Dialed In Angling podcast. We are chomping at the bit. The sun is shining. We're going to go whale on some South Dakota walleyes. I'm super pumped to be here. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, I'm Tony Roach. This has been the Dialed In Angling podcast. Good luck fishing.